All right, so get really, because we're going deep, deep into the world of Gandhi. We're using Erickson's book, Gandhi's Truth.
Oh, fascinating choice.
It is. We're
Yeah.
going beyond the kind of, the typical saintly leader image
Right.
and trying to understand, like, how a regular guy, right,
Yeah.
becomes this global icon.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, and what's really interesting about Erickson's approach is that he looks at Gandhi's life
Yeah.
as like a case study in identity, you know?
Yeah.
He really gets into the contradictions and the messy parts, which makes it so insightful.
It does. It really does. Okay, so let's start like right at the beginning.
Sure.
Gandhi was born into this kind of like really interesting family setup. So picture this.
Okay.
His childhood home was this tiny, cramped kitchenette
Really?
in this super bustling part of India, right? But like just a few steps away, his father,
Okay.
who was a prime minister,
Wow.
held court in these huge courtyards.
Yeah.
Total contrast, right?
Huge. Yeah. It's a stark contrast. And I think Erickson points out that this exposure to such different social realities probably really shaped Gandhi's worldview, right?
Oh.
He's navigating these two worlds from like day one.
Yeah.
And maybe that's where that empathy for the marginalized comes from.
It's like built in from childhood.
Yeah.
So then you've got his mother, Bataliba.
Right.
She was super religious, but not in like the typical way, right?
Yeah.
She blended Hindu scriptures with the Quran and totally rejected idolatry.
Wow.
That's not the norm, is it?
No, it's pretty unique. And I think it had a big impact on Gandhi's own spirituality, you know?
Yeah.
He gets that openness to diverse religious ideas from her, that willingness to question and kind of find his own truth.
So he's raised with this like skepticism towards blind faith, which is interesting because he becomes, this huge spiritual figure himself.
Exactly. It's a paradox. He rejects dogma, but he's deeply spiritual in his own way.
Yeah.
And I think for Erickson, that's all tied to his search for identity.
Okay, I see that.
He's experimenting, testing boundaries, always trying to figure out who he is.
It's like he's making his own path, not following one.
Right. And that's where the psychological stuff gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Erickson talks about these identity crises we all have,
Right.
those moments of intense questioning.
Absolutely.
And for Gandhi, they were often triggered by outside events, like his dad's declining health and career.
Oh, so he's carrying that weight, those feelings of responsibility, maybe even guilt from a really young age.
Yeah, probably. And it maybe even gets worse when his father dies.
Makes sense.
Erickson thinks Gandhi might have felt a need to atone for, any perceived shortcomings.
Wow.
Which might have fueled his drive to alleviate suffering on a grand scale later on.
Like he had to fix things.
Maybe. And then there's that myth, the one about Shravana, the guy who carries his blind parents on a pilgrimage.
Yeah, Gandhi loved that story, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah.
And Erickson sees it as a foreshadowing of Gandhi's future role. Like he'd carry the burdens of his people, lead them on this journey towards freedom and justice. But the interesting thing is, it wasn't just a conscious choice.
Yeah.
This sense of responsibility was embedded in him,
Yes.
shaped by his childhood and those cultural narratives.
It's like he was primed for it in a way.
Yeah, it's not just that he decided to be a leader, it's deeper than that.
Right. It's ingrained.
Mm.
Okay, so now let's fast forward to Gandhi in England.
Okay.
Totally different scene, right?
Huge shift.
Here's this young guy, steeped in Indian traditions, suddenly in the heart of the British Empire.
Talk about a culture clash.
I know. He went to study law, but man, it seems like he's experimenting with a lot more than just legal theories.
Oh, absolutely. He tried to fit in with the London crowd, even tried to be a dandy, took dancing lessons, explored Western fashion,
Right.
even dabbled in eating meat, which was a huge no-no for him. It's like he's trying on different identities, seeing what fit.
That's so human, though.
Yeah.
He wasn't just this, serious, saintly figure from the start.
Yeah.
He was just a young guy figuring things out, making mistakes,
Totally. And that experimentation was important for him. He's exposed to new ideas, new ways of thinking.
Yeah.
And it forces him to really examine his own beliefs and values.
So he's synthesizing. He's
Right.
not just rejecting everything.
Exactly.
So even in England, he's still shaping his Indian identity.
Yeah.
And this is where his decision to be vegetarian gets interesting, right?
Totally.
It wasn't just about diet. It was a statement. He's aligning himself with a cause,
Yeah.
both in England, where vegetarianism was growing,
Right.
and back in India, where it was seen as resisting British influence.
It was like a political act.
It was. And then, boom, he gets excommunicated by some branches of his caste for traveling overseas.
Whoa, talk about a setback.
Yeah, imagine that, right?
Yeah,
You're already questioning who you are, where you belong,
exactly.
and then your own community rejects you.
It could have been devastating.
Totally. But Gandhi, instead of backing down, he doubles down on his convictions.
Yeah.
It's like this rejection actually makes him stronger.
Right. He doesn't conform. He owns his outsider status, which kind of foreshadows his later challenges to authority, even when there are huge consequences.
He's like, I'm making my own rules now.
Pretty much. And those rules, that path, takes him to South Africa.
Right, and that's where things really heat up, right? That's where Satyagraha is born. But before we get there, let's talk about the scene in South Africa at the time. What was life like for Indians there?
Well, it was rough. It was a system of total segregation and discrimination.
Yeah.
Indians were second-class citizens, denied basic rights, treated terribly. And even Gandhi, a lawyer, experienced this firsthand. There's that story about him getting thrown off a train just because of his skin color.
Wow, that's just...
It's awful. But it was a turning point for him. He'd already been grappling with injustice and inequality.
Yeah.
But this experience in South Africa, it brings it all into focus. It ignites a fire in him, this determination to fight for justice. Not just for himself, but for everyone facing oppression.
And that's where Satyagraha comes in.
Right.
But it's not just about, protests and marches, right?
Yeah, it's way more than that. It's a whole philosophy, a way of life.
Explain it.
Okay, so Satyagraha means truth force. It's the idea that truth has power.
Okay.
And that by sticking to truth and nonviolence, you can overcome anything.
Powerful.
But for Gandhi, it wasn't just an idea. It was something he lived, a constant experiment in pushing the boundaries of peaceful resistance.
So here we have this lawyer who's already questioned tradition, been ostracized.
Right.
And now he's staring down racism.
Yeah.
It all feels like it's building to something big.
You're right. Each challenge, each of those identity crises that Erickson talked about, they pushed Gandhi to dig deeper, to confront his beliefs and refine his approach.
Makes sense.
And South Africa, it's like the perfect place for him to really forge his philosophy and his leadership.
Okay, so how does he actually put Satyagraha into action? What does it look like in the real world?
Well, one of the first big tests is the Black Act.
The one that forced Indians to register and be fingerprinted, right?
Yeah. Gandhi saw it as a way to dehumanize and control the Indian population.
Oh, absolutely.
And he mobilized the community to resist, but peacefully.
So what did they do?
They did mass protests, burned their registration cards, refused to cooperate.
Really?
But it was all peaceful, disciplined, and it totally shocked the authorities. It was like a new kind of resistance, something they'd never seen.
And this is just the start, right?
This is just the beginning.
Right.
Gandhi's in South Africa for over 20 years, refining his methods, building a movement, setting the stage for his life's work, fighting for India's freedom.
So we've got this foundation now, right? The childhood stuff, the experiments with identity, the confrontation with injustice.
It's all connected.
Yeah. And now we're about to see how this all comes together when he goes back to India.
It's going to be big.
But before we get there, let's just take a second to appreciate how much we've uncovered already. It's like we're starting to see the real person, the human being, behind all the legend.
And that's what makes this so fascinating, right? We're not just reciting facts about Gandhi.
Right.
We're trying to understand the forces that shaped him, the struggles he faced, the choices he made, and the impact it all had. It's a complex and inspiring story.
It is.
And we're just getting started. It's kind of wild to think about those years in South Africa, it was almost like a mini version of the bigger fight for freedom,
Oh, yeah.
The things he's dealing with there, the racism, the economic exploitation, people being shut out of politics. That's all happening in India, too, just on a larger scale.
Right, right. So when he goes back to India in 1915, it's not like he's entering a totally different world. He's bringing all that baggage with him.
Exactly. And it's not just ideas, right? He's got a refined method for resistance, something that's been tested and works.
So he's got his toolkit.
Yeah. But now he's got to apply it to a whole new situation, a whole new set of problems.
And those problems are huge. Man, British colonial rule, that's deeply entrenched power and oppression. Where do you even start with something that big?
Well, he had to really understand the specifics, right? So he travels all over India, listening to people, seeing the conditions, getting a sense of the country.
He's doing his research.
He is. And remember, India is vast and diverse, tons of languages, religions, cultures. Gandhi had to find a way to bring people together despite those differences to create a common goal.
So it's like he's doing an anthropology project on his own country.
Kinda, yeah. But at the same time, he's got to build a movement, right?
Right.
And he does that by connecting with people personally, speaking to their sense of justice, their desire for freedom, their dignity.
He knows how to speak to people.
He does. He uses language people understand, metaphors, stories from Indian culture. He's not just a politician, he's a spiritual leader, a teacher, a symbol of hope.
So he's got this movement growing. How do the British take this? I mean, they can't be happy about this challenge to their authority, right?
At first, they kind of brush him off. They see him as like a harmless weirdo,
Mhm.
a religious guy who's not a real threat,
They underestimate him.
big time. But as Gandhi gets more influential and the movement grows, they get nervous.
Yeah.
They try to silence him, discredit him, even jail him, but nothing works.
Why not? What's different about him?
It's his commitment to truth and nonviolence. His willingness to suffer for what he believes in makes him untouchable, almost.
It's like the more they try to shut him down, the stronger he gets.
Exactly. And seeing his resilience, his faith in satyagraha, inspires millions of Indians to join the fight.
Yeah.
They see a leader who's not scared of the most powerful empire in the world, and they're willing to follow him, even if it means jail, violence, maybe even death.
That's intense.
It was. And the risks were real. The British cracked down hard on satyagraha with brutality, violence, imprisonment. They even tried to pit Indians against each other using religion and ethnicity.
That's awful.
It was. But Gandhi never backs down. He sticks to nonviolence even when faced with the worst kind of brutality.
Why? Why not fight back?
He believed that violence just creates more violence, more hate and suffering. He thought true liberation had to come from love, compassion, forgiveness.
That's radical, especially under colonial rule where violence was seen as the only way to break free.
And that's what makes Gandhi revolutionary. He's challenging not just the politics, but the whole idea of power and resistance.
He's flipping the script.
He is. He showing that real strength comes from your morals, from your commitment to truth and justice, from being willing to sacrifice yourself for the greater good.
So we've got this movement in India, but the world is about to explode, right? World War I starts in 1914. That puts Gandhi in a really tough spot. He's all about nonviolence, but he also feels loyalty to Britain. How does he handle that?
It's a tough period for him. He's wrestling with these competing loyalties, trying to figure out what to do.
It's like a moral tug of war.
Totally. He believes violence is never the answer, but he also feels like he should support the war effort, defend the empire he's part of.
What a dilemma. So what does he do?
He finds a way that's both practical and sticks to his principles. He encourages Indians to volunteer for non-combat roles in the war, like ambulance drivers and medics.
That's clever.
Yeah, he sees it as a way to show they're loyal without going against their beliefs about nonviolence.
So he finds that middle ground, that compromise.
He does, and it helps him understand satyagraha even better. He realizes that true nonviolence isn't about being passive or weak. It's about actively engaging, finding creative ways to resist injustice, and trying to transform conflict through love and understanding.
It's like he's taking nonviolent resistance to the next level, figuring out how to use it in even the most complicated situations.
Exactly. He's not just talking about different politics. He's talking about a different way of being in the world, how we relate to each other and the problems we face. It's all about compassion, empathy, and respecting all life.
Okay, so the war ends, but the fight for India's freedom keeps going, right?
It does.
And Gandhi's role in that fight is just going to get bigger. But before we get into that, let's talk about something that's often overlooked with Gandhi. His views on sex.
Ah, yes. This is where things get interesting, and for some people controversial. Gandhi saw sexuality as this powerful force that could either liberate you or trap you.
Interesting.
He thought that if you didn't control your sexual desires, they could distract you from finding truth and self-realization.
So he's not anti-sex, but for being mindful and intentional about it.
Right. And this is where his idea of brahmacharya comes in.
What's that?
It often gets translated as celibacy, but it's more than that. It's about being mentally, emotionally, and spiritually pure, having self-mastery so your desires don't rule you.
It's like having control over yourself.
Yeah, exactly. But he didn't just decide this one day. He experimented a lot, explored himself before really embracing brahmacharya.
So what was that like? What did he do?
Well, when he was younger, he struggled with lust, guilt, that whole tension between what he wanted and his spiritual goals. He tried different things: vegetarianism, fasting, not having sex for periods of time. He even slept next to young women to test his self-control.
Seriously, wow. It's like he was pushing himself to the edge, seeing how much willpower he had and what sex really meant to him.
It was intense, and it's important to remember this was all happening within Indian culture and religion, where celibacy is often seen as a path to enlightenment, a way to go beyond the physical body and focus on higher things.
So those ideas were already around him.
Yeah, but his views on sex were also shaped by his own experiences, his own struggles with desire, and trying to fit his sexuality into his spiritual life.
Right, it was personal. But I gotta say, some people find his views on sex pretty problematic.
Oh, absolutely. There's been a lot of debate and criticism, people saying it was repressive, unrealistic, even harmful.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, what worked for Gandhi might not work for everyone. We got to be careful about applying his ideas too broadly, right?
Definitely. His approach to sexuality was very specific to him, and we need to acknowledge the complexity of human sexuality and how different everyone's experience is.
So we can learn from what he tried, his struggles, what he learned, but we don't have to agree with everything he concluded.
Exactly. So how does all this stuff about sex connect to his bigger idea of satyagraha?
Good question. I don't see the link right away.
Well, Gandhi thought that being able to control your desires and impulses, what he called self-mastery, was key to being truly free and resisting injustice effectively.
So, like, if you're controlled by your desires, someone can manipulate you.
Yeah, but if you've mastered your desires, you're truly free and can act with a clear conscience.
So it's not just about not having sex. It's about being aware of yourself, being disciplined, and ultimately loving yourself.
Exactly. And that self-love, that inner strength, is what lets you stand up for what's right, resist oppression, and fight for justice without being violent.
Powerful stuff.
It is. He's saying true power doesn't come from controlling others, but from controlling yourself.
You control yourself, you control your destiny.
And that control, that inner freedom, is what lets you act with love, compassion, and really understanding how connected we all are.
Okay, so we've talked about Gandhi's early life, how Satyagraha developed, his time in South Africa, his return to India, and his views on sex, which are definitely complicated.
Yeah, lots to unpack there.
And all of this leads up to what many people see as the most important part of his life, leading the movement for India's independence.
It's the big one.
It is. But before we get into those epic struggles, there's one event that I think really shows how Gandhi's methods and leadership worked in practice. It's the Ahmedabad mill workers' strike in 1918.
Ah, yes, the Ahmedabad event. It's a fascinating example of how Gandhi used satyagraha in a specific local conflict. But what they learned there would have a huge impact on how he approached the fight for India's freedom.
So set the scene for us. What's going on in Ahmedabad, and how does Gandhi get involved?
So Ahmedabad was a big industrial city, lots of textile mills. The workers in these mills, they were dealing with really tough stuff. Low pay, crazy long hours, unsafe conditions. And to top it off, the plague had just ripped through the city.
So people already on edge.
Yeah, real hardship. And then, boom, the mill owners say they're cutting wages.
Oh, man, that's like pouring gasoline on a fire.
It was a disaster waiting to happen, and that's exactly what went down. Workers went on strike, they wanted a raise, better conditions, the owners wouldn't budge, and things escalated quickly.
So that's where Gandhi comes in, right? He sees this fight as a chance to try out satyagraha on a smaller scale before taking it to the fight for independence.
Exactly. He saw the strike as like a microcosm of the bigger struggle against injustice, a testing ground. He figured if satyagraha worked here, it could work for India.
Makes sense. So how did he handle it? What were his strategies, and how did satyagraha fit in?
First, he really connected with the workers, spent time listening to their complaints, understanding what they wanted, building that trust. He wanted the movement to be driven by the workers, not controlled by him.
Interesting. He wasn't swooping in like a superhero to save the day?
Nope. He was empowering the workers to fight their own fight.
Which is key to satyagraha, right? It's not about Gandhi calling the shots. It's about helping people resist peacefully based on truth, unity, and being willing to sacrifice. Okay, so how did that actually play out? What did they do?
They held peaceful marches, demonstrations, public meetings to get the word out and build support. They did civil disobedience stuff like refusing to work or pay taxes. And a big one, Gandhi went on a fast.
The fast. He does that a lot, doesn't he?
Yeah.
What was the goal of fasting in this situation?
Well, practically speaking, it put pressure on the owners. People felt sympathy for Gandhi, and it made the owners look bad. They were feeling the heat from the workers, from the public, and even their own conscience.
It's like he's using his body to make a moral argument, right? Like, if you won't listen to reason, maybe you'll listen to the suffering of a good man.
It's powerful stuff, and you know what? It worked. The owners finally came to the table and they hammered out a deal. The workers got a good raise and their working conditions improved. It was a huge win, and it proved that Satyagraha had teeth.
But it was more than just winning a fight, right? It showed that peaceful resistance could achieve real social justice.
Absolutely. The Ahmedabad event was like a ripple effect, inspiring workers all over India to organize and demand their rights. It showed that even the most powerful people could be moved by truth and nonviolence, and it cemented Gandhi's reputation as a leader who could bring people together and lead them to victory.
It's like this one event was the turning point, setting the stage for the bigger fight for India's freedom.
It was. And one more thing, the Ahmedabad event led to the creation of the Textile Labor Association, the TLA.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, one of the first trade unions in India. It was huge for improving workers' lives, not just in Ahmedabad, but everywhere.
So it wasn't just a symbolic victory. It brought real change to working people.
It did. The TLA was ahead of its time, fighting for workers' rights, pushing for better communication between workers and bosses, and supporting social programs. It was a real-world example of Gandhi's vision for a fairer society.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into Gandhi's life and what he stood for. We talked about his early life, how he developed Satyagraha, his time in South Africa, coming back to India, even his complicated views on sex.
Yeah, we went deep.
And it all came together in Ahmedabad, where he used Satyagraha to get a win for the workers.
What's amazing is that we're just scratching the surface. There's so much more to Gandhi. His role in India's fight for independence, his ideas about nonviolence, his spirituality, what he left behind for us to think about.
Gandhi was complicated, no doubt about it, full of contradictions. But he also had unwavering beliefs, deep compassion, and he truly believed that truth and love could change the world.
And his message still matters today. In a world with so much violence, injustice, and inequality, he reminds us that change is possible, that even the most powerful systems can be challenged, and that peaceful resistance can make a real difference.
So as we wrap this up, let's leave our listeners with something to think about, something that builds on what we've talked about.
Imagine Gandhi was here today. What would he say about our world? What injustices would he fight? What experiments would he try? And how would he inspire us to live more truthfully, more compassionately, more bravely?
That's a good question. And it's a challenge for all of us to stand up, take action, and make a difference in our own way. But remember, as Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world.
On that note, we'll leave you to reflect on this remarkable man. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the life and mind of Mahatma Gandhi.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering your own truth.